Good evening. It is 7:43 p.m. You are joining us here on this Tuesday evening on Pump Up the Volume. If you're joining us again, thanks again. Thanks for following us, and of course for continuing to take time to listen to the questions that we're posing and to engage in some of the conversations through the comments section on Facebook or through whatever medium you're watching, because I know that we're actually streaming through multiple platforms. If you are joining us for the first time, my name is Daniel Muñoz. I'm a medical doctor, also entrepreneur, and prior independent gubernatorial candidate here in the state of Rhode Island back in 2018. And I'm joined by two of my three fellow co-hosts. One, Scott Rotundo, could not make it today. Scott is doing a lot of finance work, and he's in industry, so it's a busy time of year. We wish Scott the best. Hope the evening goes well. And of course, just to point out Scott's background, he is from WBOB 990, so also involved in independent media and an activist throughout Rhode Island, but also in the city of Pawtucket in terms of really creating forums for people to talk and to share ideas, which we need more of these days. Also, we have Mr. Bill Bartholomew from the Bartholomew Talent Podcast, also has his own show on PBS, and often is on WPRO, which at some point I guess may be permanent. But it's great to see him in all of these places. Why? Because Bill is objective and always really bringing us the raw, real news and creating conversations where we can ask not only the tough questions, but also just engage in the what might be the contentious discourse that needs to take place, not contentious as we are seeing on the news this past week, which I love for Bill to give us an update on, but more so contentious in terms of really taking what are normally hyper polarized issues and bringing all of the perspectives to the table and finding a path forward. And that's what we're also attempting to do here on Pump Up the Volume, both amplify the questions and the issues for you, but hopefully that providing you with a forum that you can take and come out of with a better understanding of what those issues are, and maybe even a solution in mind as to how we can get past them. Also, of course, Mr. Pat Ford from the Coalition Radio Network, the founder of the Coalition Radio Network, which we're streaming through, but also co-founder of the Libertarian Party in the state of Rhode Island, and also just someone who's consistently advocating for communities and providing testimony to the legislature. So I'm sure that Pat will be busy in the coming weeks or days. And as we know, there's a lot going on this time of year, and we are still in the middle of this crisis. So while I took that long time to provide an introduction, the reason is that I think more people are listening to shows like this, to independent media outlets. And the reason that people are listening is because we're not really getting information from the administration. As you know, the vehicle for that information often comes through mainstream media outlets. And so if there's a limit in the delivery of information, then independent of these mediums that are serving as channels for the administration to share ideas, you're also hearing very little about as to what's going on. And so to that end, what I'd like to do today, after this very long intro, is to really try to at least address and acknowledge everything that has happened in the past 7 days, both on the national front as well as at the state level. I would like for us to end this conversation today as to what's going on at the state level, i.e. transitioning into a different governor, what that might look like, what the current COVID crisis is like and our response to it. But let's take it now back to what happened last week, which for many of us was one of the most painful things to witness in our life here in America, right? In the greatest democracy in the world, to see some form of uprising at all was really concerning as to the future of our country and the future that I hope my daughter will have. And so, Bill, would you like to lead the way?
Well, I mean, you pretty much summarized it right there. I mean, there's not much else to say about it. One of the most disgraceful things you'll ever see. And the storming of the Capitol, the siege that, our own Justin Price here in Rhode Island seems to have been a part of it one way or another. Justin Price, the District 39 House rep down in Richmond, Exeter, who was nearly knocked off by Megan Cotter earlier this year, the progressive. And, kind of to bring it back home, you've got a guy who's just an absolute clown. It's stunning the fact that someone like that could actually be elected to any kind of body. I mean, school committee. I wouldn't have him be the guy to take out the trash at my house, thinking that there would be some kind of error. And then he turns up at the Capitol, and we don't know if he stormed the Capitol or not. But in other words, you've got the lowest common denominator of people. Not all Trump supporters or conservative leaning people fit this description, obviously. But within this faction of morons that descended on the Capitol, you've got people who just embody the same exact, in fact, a far worse version of anti-Americanism than even those who attacked us on September 11th, in my opinion, because you have people who have artificial grievances, who are total clowns, look at the costumes and whatnot, storming the U.S. So I think it's a real sad day in the history books, one that we will not soon forget. Concurrently, the governor leaving soon to leave for Washington as well, leaving many questions unanswered here in Rhode Island. Certainly far more competent than anyone participating in the Trump rally, but still plenty of questions to answer. But I don't know. I've tried to be as polite as possible about the whole Trump thing for pretty much the last 4 years. Try to stay as objective as possible. And certainly on WPRO, you take a lot of calls from people who are Trump supporters. And again, I don't think all Trump supporters fit this demographic, but the people that we saw at the Capitol, that's what not necessarily we need to eradicate, because I don't want to see anyone killed or jailed necessarily. But that's what we need to work to abolish in terms of a thought process, because if that is allowed to metastasize and grow over the next 4 years, I think we're going to hit a collision point that we've not seen yet. That's nothing like what we've experienced in the past 4 years or at the Capitol. So that's what my main concern is: keeping these people in check. No more polite behavior. Separate the notion that if you're a part of this particular faction of Trumpians, that you're somehow in support of the military or emergency responders or law enforcement or anything like that, and just call these people out for the buffoons that they are and the traitors that they are.
Thanks for sharing, Bill, and the update. And you pointed out an issue. Look, we know that we have community members, which in Rhode Island, we're a small state, we're a small family, as a whole, and in Johnston and even in Providence, right, and Central Falls, we saw a turnout where people, were voting for both candidates, Biden and Trump. And, when you kind of sit back and try to understand individuals and families that voted for, let's say, Trump, the question becomes, what were they voting for when everything that he says seems to go against the very resources and life that they're looking for their children. And so, it's interesting from my perspective that a lot of people seem drawn to him because of this notion of draining the swamp and of going against crony politics and things that you often see, right, in kind of establishment political figures. But that wasn't any, I hope that all of those individuals now see, right, that's, draining the swamp, is not destroying American society, right? Like we do live in a great country. We need to fix a lot. We need to come together and acknowledge our history and find ways of not necessarily forgetting it, but of building something anew, a new dream. So all of that is true, but anarchy is not the way. And I say that, I stand by that 100%. And what I thought we were seeing was really like just anarchy. I mean, an attempt to destroy not only symbolically what we stand for, but the very systems that were built on justice. While let's acknowledge, we can all have opinions as to what elements of injustice still exist in this just system, but to say that we should tear it down, no. And I just, my heart goes out to the officer that was killed, and even the officers that were injured as well within the door. Did you see that video of the officer screaming and yelling? And
Yep.
It's just, that's not who we are. And my hope is that in Rhode Island, even those individuals that went on to, to support the the idea that there was some type of election fraud, which I don't believe there was. Even those individuals, my hope is that they can see that words mattered, and that having a leader that does not understand how to use them and just uses them for self-interest when he does is not someone that they want to stand by, and that hopefully the state of Rhode Island does not get caught up in whatever events may happen over the next 7 days. That's my hope. But I want to hand this off to Pat. But Pat, when I hand it off, a question in my mind, something that Bill mentioned is we have, governor, and congratulations to the governor for being nominated. And as an individual, as a professional, I do not feel that it would be right for me or anyone to judge an individual for wanting to create, do some positive thing in another role, for taking on a promotion or creating a legacy for their family. What I will say, though, as a Rhode Islander and as someone the way I think about leadership is you do not leave a ship when it's sinking, and we are still in the middle of this crisis, health crisis that has certainly created an economic crisis. And I do have some concerns that this transition will.
Did we lose the doctor?
We did lose the.
Yeah.
There he is.
Oh, here he is. Okay. All right. Go ahead, doctor.
All right, sorry. So what I was saying is, thanks so much. Yeah, sorry, it froze. But what I was saying is, I have some concerns essentially that this transition will not be smooth. 2 years in this crisis. I mean, the decisions that are made in the next 6 to 12 months will impact the next 6 years. We already know it may take us time to get out of the economic slump that we find ourselves in, as well as the rest of the country. So what are your thoughts, Pat? Like what is going through your mind as the governor steps out of the role, as Lieutenant Governor McKee steps into the role, and what that means for the next 2 years and beyond?
Well, a few things. First of all, a number of my friends from around the country have asked me, given my antagonism towards the Ramondonistas, if you will, how she could do it. And I posited to them, and they seemed to find some humor in this, that it was very simple. Joe Biden was handed the list of the top 50 economies in the state and to choose from, and he simply read the list upside down. So that's probably the only way that I can explain how this administration could become a national player in economic development, because that's what commerce is. It's all about tech and economic development, and it's astonishing to see. I don't know if the Biden administration's embrace of identity politics is overcome common sense. It's literally, this administration is the poster child for failed government economic intervention. Everything they've touched has turned to poo, as they would say. And I'm not talking about the bear. And I'm talking about everything from the Commerce Corporation, which has an unrelenting record of failure, even well before Gina Raimondo came along. I'm talking about Health and Human Services, UHIP, but I'd also like to include medical cannabis in that. The management roles, I mean, what seems to, I put up a post on my social media. I said, give me your favorite memory, and talk about a triggering event. And the one that I'd like to add is, remember the chief innovation officer? Do you remember that episode where we paid someone six-figure large to work? I think it was from Washington State or something from their home. On and on and on and on. But to your point, in terms of the transition, the governor's made it clear that she's not going to resign until she's approved, and there seems to be a great deal of debate on how quickly she'll be. Her nomination will pass through Senate Commerce, I would imagine, and then the floor of the Senate. Sheldon Whitehouse, in a rare moment of discussing anything with any part of the media here in Rhode Island, seems to think it's going to be a 3 or 4 month adventure. And to your point, the state can't afford that. If this reminds me of someone who's a mayor in a troubled city and then running for governor. Do we know anyone like that coming up? Yes, we do. I would think, given the Democratic president, the Democratic House of Representatives, the Democratic Senate, the Democratic everything, that it would be that her approval is going to happen. She will become the Commerce Secretary. And I think just in a question of good faith, an orderly transition of 15 to 30 days should be sufficient. And we need a governor who's a full-time governor. And we need someone, and it's not just the fact that it's not so simple to say, well, she'll be concentrating on it. When you become a lame duck, and she's effectively a lame duck governor, you lose all your political capital. You have no more clout. And in the meantime, you put a gentleman who is arguably a very intelligent individual. I don't agree with all his politics, but you continue to put him on hold. If this were normal times, and I'm not sure what passes for normal here in the ocean state, but if these were normal times, if we were not facing a half a dozen existential crises, then okay, I get that. But these are not normal times. And to your point, Doctor, and to your point, Bill, we need whoever's going to be the governor for the next 2 years needs to dive right in right now. We are on emergency footing here. This ship is, this is clearly a case of, the violins on the deck of the Titanic. And for whatever reason, I seem to be one of the few ones echoing any level of financial concern. and on top of that, you've got the clown parade. And I always joke about Doc Corvese because I can't think of a single bigger knuckle-dragging, mouth-breathing troglodyte in our House of Representatives than Doc Corvese, who's wrong on everything. It's astonishing. It takes real work, effort, and focus to be so consummately wrong on everything. All right, he's up there. They're all digging at the trough, if you will, snarfling, making those pig-like sounds because there's a payday and there's patronage jobs there waiting. So let's move on with it. Let's get Mr. McKee into his governor's job, and let's, as we say, knock it off. How about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Pat, right? I think giving people a real understanding of what those hearings are like, the preparation work that goes into being ready to address the questions that will be made, clearly being so visible, and Commerce being such it's always an important role, but I mean this, at this time, it is one, I think, of the most publicized nominations. It's really going to, I think it's going to fall into the battlegrounds of where the Republicans and Democrats are right now. I mean, and so those hearings in general are going to be difficult, even if it's a sure-in at the end of the day. And so can the governor effectively mobilize resources? Can the governor address logistical challenges for vaccinations? Can the governor address the still potential that we have to see a more highly transmissible variant of COVID-19 impact Rhode Island's communities? And as we know, this variant has already shown to be 24% higher in terms of transmission rate within youth or people that are less than 18 years of age. So that leads to a lot of concerns. I also am concerned, and I'm just going to be very, very upfront about this. I am concerned that Lieutenant Governor McKee, in that role, has not had much funding to do much on the business side, but for the most part has mostly focused on the business side of things and not on healthcare, which is a very complicated area. And so I think, very quickly, I'd like to see the Lieutenant Governor pull in expertise and ensure that there's a transfer, if there are going to be changes made, ensure that there's a transfer of information between people as quickly as possible. And then we have to talk about equity, the lack of equity in the current administration. When I say lack of equity, I'm really talking about the ability to just look at this situation through the lens of equity, right? Racial equity, health equity. If the current governor, as much as the soon-to-be governor, aren't able to think in that way, I think that we're going to continue to face the disproportionate, the challenges of seeing communities disproportionately impacted. And that also impacts the business, the local economy of those communities. So I want to throw this back at you, Bill, because I have concerns that the communities that have been impacted by this disease will have a level of generational trauma that exceeds just health and morbidity or mental health. And those are all important. But, subsequent to those immediate consequences or the lasting impact that COVID had on people's lives, where they lost a loved one, where the loved one passed away in front of them, where their children now without a parent. Aside from that, the local economies in like a Central Falls, in parts of Providence, could easily be obliterated within the next 12 to 14 months. So what is it that this governor needs? What is it that this one or the next one needs to do to ensure that those local economies, if not have some level of protection, have at least a path ahead where they can sustain themselves, right? Because if economies in South Prov, if the business South Prov close, what is the result? We know that Brown would love to take more property, but like, how do we actually protect those local economies? So, Bill, love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, really fascinating conversation. Look, I think the reality is with Dan McKee, he is coming from two very important angles that may be able to assist in this area. One being as a mayor of Cumberland, and really the head of what I've called the mayoral peer group. James DeYosa of Central Falls, well, no longer of Central Falls, recently of Central Falls for 8 years. Don Grebbian of Pawtucket, Almond in Lincoln, Policina in Johnston, Lombardy in North Providence. This is a peer group that has worked to understand bottom-up governance. Now, politically, there may be disagreements there, and certainly in my case, from case to case, there are disagreements. But the on-the-ground approach to micro loans, to micro entities, and to making sure that the domino effect of Main Street collapsing doesn't occur, I think we're in a much better position now with Lieutenant Governor McKee than we were previously with Governor Raimondo. Lieutenant Governor McKee has also done well in a way that I'm not so sure Governor Raimondo has, to be a better listener. And from my own observations over the last 3.5 years of covering Rhode Island politics and spending admittedly much more time in person with Lieutenant Governor McKee than I have with Governor Raimondo, but I've been in situations where I've seen people walk up to Lieutenant Governor McKee with a very specific problem. Everyone from musicians to small business owners to people who are seeking political or media opportunities. And his ability to evaluate a situation on the ground with a human touch, but with some level of business experience. He does have, I think he went to Harvard. He's got, obviously has had success in small business. I think we're in a better position just from a human standpoint, whereas Governor Raimondo is coming at it from a venture capitalist perspective. I'm not so sure that the same person walks up to Lieutenant Governor McKee and Governor Raimondo that you're going to have anywhere near a similar response. I think that Dan McKee can take that to the State House, and obviously he won't be able to remedy, or even with a team of like-minded individuals, remedy all of the small business problems that our state faces. But I do believe McKee understands micro entities, he understands Main Street, and he understands how to listen to somebody and find an immediate solution to their problem that's practical. And it may be as simple as, let's get you through the next 4 months, let's get you through the next 3 months, 4 months, whatever it may be, and reevaluate at that point in time. But I think he can be more honest than Governor Raimondo has with those smaller businesses. Will we lose out in the sense that we no longer have a technocrat who's connected to industry on a global scale in some of the ways that we benefited from Governor Raimondo? Probably, but I would trade that off for someone who has a better connection to Main Street the way that McKee does.
If I can jump in, let's analyze that, because that's a great statement, Bill. But my question is, did we really benefit from that quote-unquote global reach technocrat base? This is not a state that's geared up or idealized right now. I'm not saying it can't change for that type of business. And it was a remarkable string of failures in trying to force it to be so. To your point about Dan McKee, he was my mayor in Cumberland for a number of years. Dan McKee, when you meet him, comes off as a mensch. And that's a compliment. A mensch is Yiddish for, well, every man. Yet at the same time, he's very well educated. And I think a critical difference between the McKee administration and the Raimondo administration in particular will be the quality of his nominees. I have never understood why someone with Gina Raimondo's background is essentially hired down on every level. Dan McKee strikes me as someone who, given the opportunity, I mean, there's a 2-year, in a sense, because it's a 2-year term, there are going to be people who will join his administration that might not if it was a 3 or 4 months or something like that. For them, it'll be an opportunity to exercise or stretch their managerial muscles. So he's got the opportunity to bring in subject matter experts literally at every level, as opposed to, the typical, I'll call it Kennedy-esque Democratic regime in the state, who will hire their cronies, or someone like Raimondo who will search far and wide with people who are completely look at the failure that is the Commerce Corporation. I mean, and I'm talking pre-COVID. If there's one unifying bond in this state, is that the Commerce Corporation was a failure before Gina Raimondo. It was a failure when Gina Raimondo was treasurer. It was a failure when Gina Raimondo was governor before COVID, and it is an astonishing failure now that we're in the midst of this crisis. So I look to McKee to hire up, which is to try and find the best people he can for these positions. Call me, you ready for this, optimistic? I am. Because although I don't agree with all his politics, I certainly don't agree with the corporatist. There is no appetite right now for corporatist investments in far-flung companies to come here and grace us with their tax-free presence. But to his credit, in an office that, by the way, I still think should be abolished, because of the incredible duplication of effort that takes place. But to his credit, he did build a business-friendly portfolio, and right now, despite however anybody feels, right now what Rhode Islanders need are a lot of good jobs that pay something along the realm of decent wages. And that's the way we dig ourselves out of this, is to use that financial growth. And then we can, once we get that going, then we can argue about how to spend the money. But right now, Rhode Island finances are just in the toilet. And I'm expecting him to have a lot more realistic interpretation that we can't spend ourselves out of a recession when we can't print money, as our governor seems to think. So I believe that this is one of those strokes that could actually potentially, you ready for this, in its own way save the state. Because we were on a fast track to nowhere. And I'm talking at every single level, whether it be our reaction and where we stand vis-a-vis the pandemic, where we stand economically, where we stand in terms of what folks who are more left of center describe as, equity. We are a remarkable failure on every single litmus test that you can apply to every single level of government and the economy.
So this can't be done in 2 years, right? Campaigning and managing this pandemic, it would be interesting to see how the lieutenant governor does that, given that this is going to require more than 2 years to actually rebuild Rhode Island's economy and even just rebuild a sense of community and to bring everyone together and all the other things that we need to do. So with that said, I'm interested in getting your perspective on whether you think that the lieutenant governor stepping into this role, independent of whoever is placed in the lieutenant governor role to replace him. So independent of that, is McKee, does he have a track record of challenging the establishment when necessary and taking bold steps, innovative steps? Because when we talk about technocrats, I would really say innovation is really what is behind the positive aspect of what it means to be a technocrat, right? Someone that can really understand how to bring a system together that can produce innovation, a culture that can promote innovation. And I'm not saying that the Raimondo administration did not do some of that, but I do think that every project that ended up manifesting always ended up taking the form of a kind of top-down corporate style of innovation, which frankly always becomes stagnant very quickly. If there is a grassroots efforts here for innovation, is Lieutenant Governor McKee the person to do that? I do believe that he has said a lot about giving loans and grants and money to businesses, and I hope he sticks to that, and I'm all for that as well. But what does the next step look like? What is beyond 2 years in rebuilding Rhode Island, and is Lieutenant Governor the person? What are your thoughts, Pat and Bill?
Well, okay. Going forward, we have to drastically reduce the expense of government. We just do. I've said it time and time again. I worked for, in a very low level, a large corporation's acquisitions team. And I just was a guy who, in the background, as an accountant, incredibly enough, calculated numbers. Don't pretend to be any more of that. But I was surrounded by people who were looking at issues. And, the progressive side of the marketplace, if you will, in Rhode Island politics would argue that it's quality of life and it's education. No, companies come here because it makes financial sense to. They have a responsibility to their owners, i.e. their stockholders, by the way, many of which are public unions before anyone out there says, stockholders. But, they have a responsibility to produce financial results. And one of the ways you do that is looking at the effective tax rate. And, if you include fees in the effective tax rate, this place is a nightmare. And if you include the cost of utilities and all the other things that make a business go, this place is a nightmare. There's our sales tax is too high. It's everything is wrong. But there's a tremendous group of people in this state who, and there's tremendous assets in this state that can be brought to bear. It is a wonderful place to live if you're employed. If you're not, you're screwed. So the governor has, in terms of forward thinking 2 years out, he has to make this place attractive for people to come and work here. It's really that simple, and that's the tide that lifts all boats. Now, we to your early remark about the governors, the mayors that he's hung out with, I call them the Blackstone Valley Boys, and they've been terrible in terms of economic development. They've always looked for the silver bullet. If you look at the Chamber of Commerces in the state, they're all run by big business who are all looking for a handout, by and large. That's why they do it. If you look at everywhere around us, that mentality has got to go bye-bye quickly. Because ultimately, if you're looking for equity, if you're looking for economic development, that's bottom up. You don't do it by encouraging out-of-state investors, all right, using tax breaks of all things and government guarantees to redevelop neighborhoods that currently people live in and are at least, I won't say affordable, but at least approaching some type of sense. Instead, we're still going to build a soccer stadium supposedly, and we're still going to, we're going to rip those people out of the neighborhood for a development that will fail. They all do. And so the focus has got to be on recognizing the talent base that we've got in this state and finding industries that will work here. At the same time, understanding that it's not about the giveaways. Let's stop taking money from people and then giving part of it back in the form of tax breaks. Let's make it equitable for people at every level to start businesses here, whether it be first-generation immigrant businesses who, so often those folks end up with restaurants, which have an incredible halo effect in our local economy. These are the hardest working people imaginable. They've overcome all sorts of political and legal and logistical obstacles to come to the United States. Let's welcome them by having a low cost of entry to business so that these folks can lift themselves up by the bootstraps as they want to do. Regardless of where they're from, the common denominator in immigration here is that by and large, an overwhelming majority of these folks want to work. So let's make it easier for them to work. Those are the people who typically haven't gotten the six-figure tax breaks and the $100,000 grants from whatever cliche wave runner, sea bearer, ocean stater, lighthouser, whatever it is. Those are the people who haven't gotten them. Let's make it affordable and fair, a level playing field for those people, so that when they come here, they can profit off of their strengths and make that jump into the middle class and educate their children. And maybe some of them will stay here because it's a great place to live. That's what they got to do.
Thanks, Pat. Bill?
I agree. I think that the idea now at this point is we've got to find a way to make Rhode Island sustainable. And there's a lot of important ideas politically on the table, socially on the table. But at the end of the day, it's something that, some of the viewers may know. I lived in New York for a decade. I grew up in Rhode Island. And when I came back, I came back with my wife and also a couple of friends who moved from New York. And when they got here to Rhode Island, there was everybody who wasn't from here that came up here to move here and is still here. Everyone has stayed, but was just stunned by the lack of innovative industry, considering the natural resources we have, proximity to New York, proximity to Boston. And that is something that needs to be tapped into in a real way. They push a lot of ideas on the big level, or on the I guess what you'd say the seed generator, the the friends of industry level, whether it's through through Stefan Pryor or whatever it is. That some of them have worked, some most of them haven't, and now it's about time to just seize the ideas and the innovation of, just like I said, those boots on the ground micro entities, one by one, sure them up. Many of them, if they're non-employers themselves, they at least keep families or individuals employed. And we're at a point now where the Ocean State, it can't go forward in a meaningful way if the average unemployed person right now doesn't have legitimate prospects to have a meaningful job sometime in the next 6 to 12 months. We'll have more and more brain drain, and we'll have more and more burden here in the Ocean State. And that's what we can't afford. And the big ideas as far as how we're going to change our economic trajectory from the top down, maybe they can come at another time. But right now it's time to go from a door-to-door basis of every Rhode Islander and make sure that that individual is able to sustain themselves through a meaningful job with real pay in Rhode Island, and figure out how to, that's challenge number one right now. I think McKee and his administration are much better suited to do that than the outgoing administration.
Bill,
Thanks,
could I just jump in with a question to Bill? Bill, you're tangentially related to this community as well. How astonishing is it that we have arguably the greatest design school on the planet right in the heart of Providence? And I'm tangentially related to this as well. We have an astonishing product design and art and design community on the west end of Rhode Island that's popping up. Sort of the brain drain to a certain degree has really slowed down, in part because of the pandemic, because folks don't feel comfortable moving out of the state right now to New York and places like that. All right? So all of a sudden you've got this huge design community right in the heart of Providence, all because of the Rhode Island School of Design. Bill, do you think that's been, in your time here as Rhode Island, both growing up and then coming back and knowing that you're related to folks in that community, how badly has that been underutilized here in the state?
It's borderline disgraceful, and it comes down to documents that are made and designs that are used inside the state and municipal governments, through interior design, through architecture, through urban planning, so on and so forth. Just that one entity, RISD. It's I look at my wife, she just graduated there, top of the class, she had a full ride, this, that, and the other. And she has she's not planning on staying here. She's looking to go back to New York, and that could affect my life in any number of ways as a result of the lack of a design industry to match what's going on in the ocean, in the level of minds that go through RISD, best of the world in some of their fields. And the fact of the matter is you have almost no industry.
This is my concern, right? So I think too often in Rhode Island politics, we do patchwork, right? So you get the top-down approach, you get the bottom-up approach, you get the lukewarm Governor Chafees that don't necessarily do anything that you're completely taken aback by, but also don't do anything to really push the state far forward in terms of progress. And again, it's patchwork. So yes, I do think that the bottom-up approach is the right approach. Yes, we need to help micro entities. We need to acknowledge the fact that in this state, we have not drawn a clear line between micro and small business, and that narrative, that marketing strategy has been used by the outgoing administration to actually put funds in companies that really don't need it and aren't really going to stick around for Rhode Islanders. But to carry over into the last point that you mentioned, Pat and Bill, which you carried over, which is, talent will not stay here just because there's a job. And this is my opinion, but this is why I'm going to explain my opinion. this generation, the generations that will follow, are not looking for the 9 to 5, 30, 20 plus year job that's going to give them a retirement. They're looking for environments where they can evolve, shift laterally, move verticals, and still stay in the same place where they're living. And to create that type of environment, it requires innovation in systems. And when I say systems, what I mean is, if it is hard for struggling artists to live in Rhode Island, then how do we create pipeline programs for those individuals to not only be able to employ themselves, but also give them spaces to do their art, provide protected spaces, more of them, create more festivals that, pull these individuals into the community. We see the music industry, in Nashville, right? We see music does that. It brings people to places sometimes. We see art bringing people to places. We have bits of that in Rhode Island. I don't want to, we do have bits of that, but the question is, how do we come back as quickly as possible in an economy that's going to primarily be driven by the gig economy workforce? I do not believe that manufacturing will bring back Rhode Island, but I do hope to see more manufacturers. I think the gig economy, the people that are out there hustling, doing art and doing the podcast, people that are writing and working the 9 to 5 that barely pays them. If we can address the fact that, the cost of living needs to be, it needs to be affordable to live here. That if we get affordable housing, if we make active investments in young talent while keeping the talent that has the skill set to add to that culture of innovation, then I think what we're going to mix of now and then, of today and then the future. And I think that's really what's going to attract money. Let's talk about, because look, he was working on bringing venture capital here for the first 4 years that he was lieutenant governor. That was one of his initiatives, and it didn't happen. Now, it's not Lieutenant Governor McKee's fault. Raimundo couldn't bring venture capital here either. The governor couldn't bring venture capital. So, there hasn't been success, and I will fall back on the reason why. And the reason why is not because we don't have great talent coming out of Rhode Island, but we don't have an environment where that talent is willing to risk their future and stay here. But the moment we have that environment, then the people that will be testing the Rhode Island market in terms of whether they should come here, invest here, and build companies here, will be factoring that in. What is the likelihood of the person graduating from college to stay in that place for the next 10 years? That will weight where the money that those venture capitalists are investing in goes, and where the next big company that's built in the Northeast goes. And I just want to put that out there, because it takes more than just a bottom-up approach to get to that. It takes, again, a focus on innovation. It takes risk. And a lot of what I'm talking about are legislative issues as well that need to be brought forth, talked about by whoever the governor is, and at times even, debated when the House of Representatives is choosing not to do something. So that's what we need. That's what's going to, create change, more than just parks, more than just grants to small micro businesses. It's going to take an investment in people. I said that before. I just want to continue to emphasize it, because we always do patchwork, and we need more than patchwork. We need to rebuild Rhode Island in a way that ensures that we have a sustainable economy for the next crisis. We cannot continue this, right? Every 8-10 years, it can't be we put all of our eggs in one basket and then it failed. So anyway, that's my reflection, and I hope that you both see that I was taking what you were saying and hearing it, but it needs to be all of the above. It can't just be one thing. So with that, I want to give both you, Bill, and Pat, minute to whatever you need to lift up what you're doing over the next week, where the listeners can go to see your work. And why don't Bill, we'll end with you today. You can close the show up, and then Pat, why don't you go first?
All right, super. First off, if I was, sometimes we engage at the end of the show and indulge in either an outrage or something positive. In a sort of from right field, on an international level, I would like to echo my outrage du jour. Today, or it was either today or yesterday, the United States State Department officially announced its intention to designate Yemen's Houthis as a terror group. Humanitarian organizations have been, I'm reading a little text here, but condemning the move as it will make it more difficult to provide aid to a population that is always being brutalized by the worst mass atrocity on the planet, which, by the way, is Saudi-led and which, by the way, we are helping underwrite. While all of this madness is going on here in the United States, very quietly, very stealthily, the few organizations that have the resources to engage in Yemeni relief are just had the rug pulled out from under them. They're now, an entire segment of society in Yemen is being seen as a terrorist organization. Yemen. How is it possible that people from Yemen are terrorizing the United States, and why the hell are we involved in supporting effectively a mass extermination of a people? We're going to starve the liberty into them. That's what we're going to do. So I just have to point that out, that the Trump administration, one of the reasons why, I don't know if you ever saw a movie called The Blind Side. There was a great scene in it where the young man, who is the hero, if you will, of the movie, a young football player, essentially blocked the guy out of the stadium and said, "You have to go home now." So the Donald Trump administration, for all the people who say, what can he do in 10 days? That's what he can do. Donald Trump, it's time to go home now. On a local level, quickly, I host a show here, a series of shows here called The Coalition. We've got some astonishing programming coming up this week. Tomorrow afternoon on the Golf Guys, we're going to have a special edition mid-afternoon. A gentleman by the name of Armand Katayan, who is the producer, if you will, of a show coming on HBO, talking about the life of Tiger Woods, is going to be joined by the Golf Dudes mid-afternoon. Look to the Coalition Facebook page for that. Tomorrow evening, weekly, we have a wonderful show called Ramp. It's all about inclusion and accessibility for folks who find themselves physically challenged, sometimes in very difficult circumstances. Tina Peterson hosts it on a weekly basis and has brought subject matter experts from literally around the planet to talk about accessibility. It's a wonderful show. Tomorrow, a friend of mine that I haven't had on in way too long, and if you're an activist in Rhode Island, you know this name. Shanna Kurland is going to be joining us tomorrow night at about 8 o'clock. And we're going to talk insurrection. We're going to talk revolution. And Shanna is one of my heroes of civil disobedience. She's an attorney. She's active with a group called PRISM. She was one of the folks deeply involved with DARE. And she wrote, incredibly enough, and I'm going to try and get this up on the Facebook page, for the American Civil Liberties Union here in Rhode Island, a tome on what to do if you're arrested for engaging in civil disobedience. So it's going to be a hell, in addition to pump up the volume, it's going to be a hell of a 48 hours. And this is what, as my co-host tonight is about to attest to with his own efforts, is the advantage of indie media. Because I fair to say that not a single one of those people from anywhere related to that is going to appear on Newsbreakers with Gene Valicenti. No, they're not. Bill, what do you have to say?
Armand Katayan, man, look out. I mean, that is one of the best investigative sports reporters ever, for sure.
Yep.
And, so that's pretty cool. I'll definitely be tuning into that. There's no doubt about it. Yeah, so normal stuff. I do a podcast. We're on break right now until January 26th, Bartholomew Town. You can find it at ripodcast.com. I'll be on WPRO next weekend for Matt Allen a little bit. Wednesday nights, Rhode Island PBS, 7 p.m. We do a kind of 60 minutes of Rhode Island PBS Weekly. And on that note, I just want to shift, just a quick nod here to someone who passed away last week. And I think most of the audience out there will know this individual, Bill Rappley. And, I've said it a few times now, but Bill Rappley jumped out of the television and brought you into his world. And he's one of the greatest media personalities that's ever worked in this market. He was someone who, as a kid growing up, watching Channel 10 on my mom and dad's couch, made me want to do this work. He genuinely understood how to balance news, journalism, opinion as a host of 10 News Conference, and entertainment. wearing a fedora, trench coat, doing snow angels when he was assigned to go cover the snow. He knew how to balance that in a way that very few other people know how to do anywhere, and certainly in this market. We have a lot of people that go on the radio and they give an opinion, then they try to go do a newscast at night, and very difficult to walk that fine line. Rapidly did it. I got to know him a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, through the podcast, meeting him in the field, trying to track him down. And I was very blessed to have the opportunity the last 6-9 months to work alongside him at Rhode Island PBS. And there's several moments where I realized Bill Rapley was the real deal even more, whether on a human level or on a political level. But I'll never forget 3 o'clock in the morning, election night this past year, Bill Rapley, now 2-3 months into battling brain cancer, the Ted Kennedy, John McCain brain cancer, mind you, keeping it quiet, continuing to go to work, showing up at the studio. 3 o'clock in the morning, everyone else has gone to bed. Bill Rapley calls to talk about the implications of Nick Mattiello losing his race to Barbara Ann Fenton Funk, what that means for stories, what that means for how to tell that story, where should we go, how should we bring up Jeff Britt, how do we cover this, how do we talk about it? And Bill Rapley loved his family, number one. Number two, he loved his job, covering news, covering characters, and bringing people into this world. And when you look at voter turnout, when you look at the type of moronic assumptions that people make about what's going on in the world, and particularly here in Rhode Island, it's because of people like Bill Rapley that it's not a larger number of people that aren't paying attention, because he brought people in. He made them take it seriously, even if it was just for a 60-second moment on Channel 10. So as I've said a few times now on my podcast, on PBS, on with Matt Allen, and now here on Coalition, everywhere I go, I want to make sure that I give a nod to one of the greatest media reporters and a great friend, and someone I'll never forget, as the state of Rhode Island and all of her citizens will agree, the wonderful Bill Rapley. Rest in peace.
Thanks so much, Bill. And with that, I'll just say that Bill gave everyone a shot. Coming out the gate, running for governor, unknown, and Bill didn't hesitate to give me a shot. And he didn't say things like, "Oh, for someone who graduated Central Falls, your rhetoric is great." He didn't do that. Bill respected people, and you could feel it when you were in the room, and it made the discussion so much more real, right? You were speaking with someone who was generally interested in what your thoughts were, and it made you want to share. So with that, I just want to kind of sit here for, we can sit here for a minute, give a moment of silence to Bill Rapley, and hopefully this isn't the last conversation anyone has about Bill Rapley. I think that his life journey should really serve as a testament to people in the industry now and those coming up. So here's to Bill Rapley, and we'll just sit here for a bit, and we'll close the show out after that moment of silence, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks, everyone. So here's to Bill Rapley.